All right, guys. Why do I always, not always, but majority of the time, show a mile an hour dyno chart versus a RPM plot? And we're going to go over that quick. Really easily with the Don't BS Me build right here. Well, this was a downshift. So if you look at the engine speed chart, it looks fucking terrible. This is one of the reasons why. But during a downshift, it sees the RPM range moves around and it tries to consolidate all of that work and display it. And since the motor was all over the place, it struggles. So you get this stuff. So easy way to tell is just, a nice speed chart. So then we have the other pole here over mile an hour. You can see the power come up and go out. If we switch this to engine speed, you can see, I hit it, the boost comes up, the converter comes up. It just draws a line from here to there because this takes a quarter of a second. The converter swings up. This is what happens, especially if some cars just have a loose converter and it works well. So what you're seeing here is it's doing all of its coupling between 6 and 6600 over here. So this is where it's laying down all of its work. And part of the issue here also is I have an inertia dyno and I have no way to load this. So once the converter comes up and it starts doing its work, a lot of times it'll nose slightly because it doesn't have any load to work against. And the converter really doesn't like that. And other times it'll just wad up on all of its power and then try to couple and unload it. And you'll see it nose a little. Funny things happen. So everything from here to here is irrelevant. And the harder you push a converter, the funkier this starts to look. Where can I go into, let's look at Mark's race car, the white one years ago is a good example because the converter would immediately swing way high and seem like it was trash. And then it would make a ton of mile an hour. So what we're looking for is how much mile an hour is the car putting out. So Mustang, Mark 408, 84 millimeter. Yeah, you can see this. The converter, this is low boost, and it swings to 55. It does a loop-de-loop. It actually pulls the motor back, loads everything up, and then starts to paint a line across. And it's really hard to tell what the fuck is going on with the loop-de-loop and the little jaggy. But if you look at wheel speed, you can see it's doing an amazing job. The converter is coming up and it is holding mile an hour from, 100 to 170. It's making 650 rear wheel. So you can see this converter and combo is just making all that power over this entire mile an hour, where if you look here, it looks like it's garbage. Like, oh, a power band is awful. Well, this car for 75 miles an hour is making over 650 horsepower to the tire over almost, 75 mile an hour. So that's incredible. Obviously, you can see a lot of work is getting done here. And that's what we're looking at with a turbo auto car, because the converter on a lot of combos is going to come up and just sit. And sometimes it'll make no mile an hour. Sometimes this car will quit at 120 miles an hour and the RPM plot looks the same. Meanwhile, the gearing should go 175 and you're hitting 168 and you're like, oh, I don't have that much loss. Well, you look at this mile an hour chart and if it cuts off here, you're like, man, I got 40% converter loss. And as you can see, as we pour on some power here, something funny happened here, obviously. Let's get rid of you. Yeah, you can see it's doing a ton of work. Yeah, this one we just lifted early. Most of these, are carrying out great. And if we switch all these to speed, or sorry, motor speed, I mean, they start to look god awful, especially at high horsepower. You know, like what? You're like, okay, making 900 horsepower, and everything from here to here on the plot is garbage. But again, looking at wheel speed, you can see it's carrying till you lift. It's doing really good. So this is why I show this all the time. And I'm trying to think if I did a car recently where it just had tons of converter loss. I would love to find one. You know, I'd have to, maybe I can cut and come back. But yeah, let's do that. All right, I found one real quick. This one I'll show you. On low power here, about 480 or enough difference. What do we got going on here? 480, 500. You can see the mile an hour, 120 mile an hour. I think this thing was struggling from the beginning. Let's take a look at the engine speed. You can see here the converter pretty quickly goes to 5,500, and then it pulls, okay. And then this one, it almost seems to me like the converter only grabbed at like 6,700. And I remember this car, like we bumped the boost a little and it wanted to go right for the rev limiter, which I think was this. And you can see it just makes this odd, smooth plot, like it never couples. And you can see it on speed where speed just noses off. And I tickled the limiter here and lifted. And then we hit it with a little bit more boost, and the car, I think, hit the limiter, it went right for like 7K, and it actually jumped so much that it doesn't even show it going that high. But you can see here, just losing mile an hour. That's the big thing. Much less mile an hour on a short geared car, or it might have done 140, but the converter is almost blowing through at 4 and change. You bump the boost a little and then it does. So if this car had a respectable gear and you made 500 horsepower, and you can consider, I think this was it was a Fox. 500 rear wheel in a Fox is enough to go easy 10s. A good chassis will go 9s, but it's not going to go 9s at 110, which is where you're going to be on the rev limiter, maybe even sooner. Technically, if you consider, again, my dyno is inertia, and it's just the weight of the roller. There's no resistance. If you have, the roller weighs like, from what I hear, 2,000 pounds. If you have a 3,000 pound Mustang, you're getting more loss than that. It's pushing more weight, and most of the time being less effective. By the time you add in wind resistance at 100 miles an hour, the damn thing will hit the rev limiter at 105. You'll probably be on the limiter in high gear at the 8th mile, wondering what happened. The car should easily go 130 plus in that situation, but your mile an hour ain't going to get there because the fluid couple just isn't working. So there's a good representation of why I always show mile an hour on an unlocked car, because it's just going to dyno fucking weird. It's much easier, obviously, like when I have a lockup 4L80E turbo car, it plots a little bit nicer too because it takes its time building through the RPM range. Also makes the car usually laggy as hell, considering it's supposed to swing up through. But I hope that offers a little bit of an explanation, and I hope you like my internet correction factor here. But yeah, that explains quite a bit of it. Hopefully you guys that always ask get to see this. Other people that knew nothing about it, maybe that's a neat refresher. But there you go. Let me know if you have questions about this and other stuff down below.